2024. Attendance, everyone's here except for Chris, right? Are we missing anybody else from the group? All right. Public comments, seeing no public, probably skip right by that. And work group member announcements.
I can give you a fisheries update that might play into what we're doing here, or at least take it into consideration. The New England Council has just did a lot of remanagement with our fish stocks here in New England, which are going to be detrimental to all three states, which is going to cause hard bait issues to the lobstermen. So I think when we look at considerations, specifically anyways for the next 3 years, restricting any bait operations could directly be impacting the lobster fishery.
What's hard bait?
Haddock racks, pollock heads, hake heads generally come from the ground fishery, but with these new allocations, we're already at the historical lowest effort with aging of the fleet. I think the average age is 62. We don't even have enough allocation to get the least amount of effort off our docks. So we're gonna have a hard time holding infrastructure within 4 states. So it's gonna drive the demand of foreign product. So any chance we get for domestic product, it's gonna be in high demand, so I think, we should be looking at that in consideration, especially for the next couple to 3 years anyways, until the next stock assessment comes through. And they did another 90% reduction on a 90% reduction with the herring stock. And a lot of that was because we couldn't get access with the trawls inside 20 miles. So that's something else. I don't know what we can do here, or make a request through you maybe, to see if we can get some of the gear moved certain times of the year. I'm working with the state and the feds, trying to get the New Hampshire Marine Survey to get a more accurate account for codfish and herring. Talking to the herring fleet, it seems like the entire schools were tight to our shores. So lobster gear is so thick, nobody's willing to do it. So that's something, I don't know if we can request that through this advisory maybe?
What's the actual request?
They're looking for 1 mile spacing to get a trawl. That's the protocol. 3 knots at 20 minutes, so it's 1 nautical mile. They're gonna have pre-stations coming up, I think within 3 months. I'll get the map ahead of time. I'll send it out to everybody as well.
You want lobster gear moved, or?
We can request it, they don't have to unless the DMR makes the request. Inshore outside of that array area, the feds don't really have much action. But the 2 possible routes that they're looking at is either gonna be the Sheepskin or Cousins Island. So if we can get a baseline data sooner than later, the better we'll be when construction starts.
What time of year are they looking to do it?
They're looking at doing it every 3 months. But if we don't get every 3 months, we're missing windows with climate change. 1 degree variances matter if something spawns or it doesn't. So if we don't get timely data for the next 5 years, we could be potentially wiping out a whole substrate of stocks. I mean, technically, I don't know if anybody's been paying attention, but they took codfish into 2 broad stocks and they put it into 4 broad stocks. Science Center's new little thing. And, the fisheries argument was, well, my argument was pretty simple to them was, in my family, we're mostly males. My father goes to California, my brother goes to Alaska. Does that mean there's 3 substrates of lemurs? And then if somebody leaves California, comes back to Maine, does that mean we're back to 2? It's almost like a micromanagement tool at the federal level.
So could you repeat where this is coming from, New England Council?
The New England Council gets handed the data from the Woods Hole Science Center. So whatever they're handed beforehand, that's all the Science and Statistical Committee is the group of scientific leads, professors from a lot of the universities, UNH, UMaine. They all sit down, go through all the data, and then we try to pass it off to the management based on PTs and groundfish committees. They'll can make the request based on the data we're given, but the problem is the data is missing large gaps. Those large gaps are mostly coming from the inshore. So I've also talked with a few of the other towns along our coast to see if we can do a little something together, trying to get a better understanding, because right now they're going to try to take lobster gear and give a mortality rate for codfish catch. And the only data the SSC used was based on 8 surveyed trips from offshore lobster boats outside the historical area. And then they based the entire region by that mortality rate. So it doesn't even make sense what the Science Center did, but we requested them to remove that data because it's the only data that's there.
Is this ASMFC?
ASMFC only plays one part when the lobster division, so if any new rules or regulation will go before that board. But as far as the groundfish stocks, that's a direct hold with the New England stakeholders. So the Mid-Atlantic and New England region share dogfish, we share codfish, and I think there's a couple other species. I think northern shrimp is in their task. Those meetings are tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. at the Westin in Portland, too.
Are you going to be there?
I will be there.
Yeah.
We're pushing for industry-based data.
Right.
Using lobstermen, using shrimp traps inshore, so that's something, we're gonna probably split it up by zones, because it's only gonna be FMP certain access. So we're gonna be picking regional knowledge, pretty much anybody with prior history, if we're gonna get an accurate depiction of how climate change maybe shifted the stocks. So that could be a good possibility why we're just missing that window too. Our big task with NEFSA is trying to get real-time knowledge back applied to the science. Otherwise, assumptions are what, well, that's where committees and advisories end up getting started, because too many assumptions get made. Other than that, that's about it. And I've also reached out to Sebastian Bell, because I got other projects we're looking at that could require hatcheries, which I don't know if the town would be looking into something like that. Pretty much sending out your local fishermen or recreational fishermen harvesting certain stocks, squeezing them for their eggs, getting them back to hatcheries here on shore, getting them to hatch, then sending them back to the same location. We did this from 1880 to 1950. The rationale was that was pretty easy. I don't know if anybody knows, but 10-Pound Island in Gloucester for almost 80 years was a codfish pollock hatchery. Now, in 1870, with a small population, we witnessed codfish numbers and pollock numbers dropped along our coast. So they decided to create that hatchery in 1880 in 3 locations. One was down East Maine, I think one was in New Hampshire, and the other one was in Gloucester. Well, from 1880 to 1950, the population grew and so did the fisheries. We only saw a decline in the fisheries from 1954 to 1976, where we created the Magnuson. So we could possibly be trying to rebuild our stocks to a number that's not naturally achievable, which is why I'm looking at Sebastian and some of the other to see if that's an avenue they would like to work, in a proactive approach. I mean, I met with Linda Greenlaw in Surrey, Maine, too, because Crystal Candy's group was already up there, toting for a moratorium, but what she doesn't realize is Surrey only has 2 fishermen. And Linda's the only aquaculturist there, and she's requesting for another lease. It's pretty much a wide open region, nobody fishes it. I think that's something we need to realize here. It's like, well, what are we, a little over 100 aquaculture leases here in town? So it's 735, roughly. I mean, we got large swaths of water just east of here that are being unutilized. That was half the rationale, I mean, I'll be open. Crystal tries to call me every other day. She's kind of a pain. But some of her rationale is based on, I think a lot of us here know where the funding is coming from, some of this stuff. The trick is the pro approach that we're looking at. I mean, from my standpoint, I'm not talking about NEFSA, just me personally, is I don't want to see anybody get denied a right to work. But when we're impacting, the socioeconomics side of it, of prehistory, what the town was, been for generations, this is why this is important. A proactive approach. I mean, I also had a good 30-minute talk with Pat Kelleher. He gave me very specific details of what he chose for certain farms. But the rationale was, I gave it to him. I go, it's not that I don't trust you, Pat, but what happens in the next round when you're retiring in 2 years, and let's just say the next commissioner is very pro aquaculture. I go, where is the criteria and the definition to say how we And I think that's kind of the premise of what we're all here for. It's not to say no to anybody, but it's to say, how do we get there? And logically, you couldn't really argue with that, because it's not me saying no, it's me saying, well, where's the definition? And I know that Surrey and Linda and those other towns would actually like to have participation in what we're doing. They find it very interesting. So I don't know if that's something we could look at, maybe trying to reach out to some of these other towns, on the next round and try to get a little more input. Like I told them at Surrey, it's just like, what we choose here, it might not work for you. But if we can at least set a criteria, other towns can adopt it to their own piece and work with the state on their own way. Other than that, I'll zip the lip.
Thank you, Jerry.
A lot of phone calls.
All right, any other work group member announcements? How about, so next we'll move on to the agenda. I don't have any mapping updates for you guys other than I am going to just cover Quahog Bay as a high-density area because I can't find anyone to argue with Barry Catlin, so that's how the map will go out, and people can have a look at it when we do the public hearing, and if somebody has a comment, then they can raise it. But and then in the meantime, I'm going to continue to go pick off individuals between now and Christmas and try and get anybody else that I can think of that hasn't looked at stuff yet, so that we can get it ready to be put out for everybody to take a look at in a reasonable time, in January maybe, so that we've got something to put on the town warrant.
You were asking about deadline for warrant.
Yeah.
When is, do you know?
I don't know officially. I'm gonna say early February.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it's February 8th, because town meeting's March 8th, and they have to have 30 days notice.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'll get the updates done as soon as I can. I'd like to get them done before Christmas, and then we can throw it on a public hearing sometime between Christmas and January, end of January. But that's my goal for the maps.
I do know that I've heard from a few people in town and a few people on the committee here that feel like they want to put more input on that map as well.
Yep.
So I want to make sure that we really, really follow through with that. It's more important to have an accurate map than just get a map up that doesn't make sense. So
Yep.
the town meeting's a town meeting, but we want to make sure if we're going to use this, I don't have all the information, Jerry doesn't have all the information or date, but we need to go get it. If we need more information, we as a group need to go get that information. That's really important to me.
Yep. And I think if anybody wants to go chasing people down in the meantime, Paul, you have all the PDFs of the little broke out areas, right? So anyone can get a whole batch of those to go run around with if you guys want, go crazy. Give me anything that you got and I'll add it on as we're going through.
And we still have maps too, so if people wanna come to the town office, you can direct them here, and we can let them fill in the maps.
Yep.
You mentioned Barry Catlin with Quahog Bay. What do you mean?
He basically covered the entire thing, and it wasn't like designated trawls or like, well, I drag through here, I do this. It was all of Quahog Bay. He is attesting is all needed for heritage fisheries. So I was hoping we could maybe find some middle ground where, there'd be some room to, around the edges or something, but,
I think the room that was there has already been taken up by snow water.
and maybe that's the case. So like I said,
That's a
that's.
huge pogie fishery up in Quahog Bay, too. There's a ton of
Yep.
pogies there landing.
So I'm gonna depict it the way that he presented it to me, and then, like I said, if someone's got a different opinion, they can bring it up.
I don't know if he's leaving anything out, but I spent the winter in Quahog Bay and I witnessed diving, dragging in the summer, bogeying. And that's not counting all the lobster gear you see in there certain times of the year, so. And to find any that lacks any product there, geez, good luck. You go from shore to shore, and that bottom, it just, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what we're putting in there, so
Yeah.
that'll be, I'm just trying to be careful to not, I don't want us to do stuff that, the department or other people are gonna be like, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. So if it's defendable and that's what our fishermen are saying, that's what's going on the map.
We have to keep in mind, too, that Harpswell as itself, kind of what Jerry was saying earlier, there's only 2 fishermen down in Surrey.
Yep.
Harpswell has more licensed lobstermen than any town in the state.
Yeah, I think
And also more licensed pogie fishermen.
that's why we're such a great example town to be doing this. If anybody's got a complicated system to work out, it's this town. So if we can manage to come up with a strategy to deal with this, there's no reason any other town can't do it. It's gonna be simpler for them.
Right.
So,
As far as Cohog Bay, I can have John Borden, he lives right there. He's also on the board with NEF, so I could have him give you a shout. Yeah, I mean, I think he goes Cohog in there all the time.
I know there's a ton of activity, and I know that channel by Pole Island to get in there is pretty narrow, so pretty much once you get past there,
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't hold, I mean, he has a town residence there on the dock, but he doesn't do any fisheries here in town, so he'd be kind of a neutral to talk to.
yep. Nope, that's good. I just want our stuff to be accurate and defendable. We don't want it to be, crazy, but if that's what it is, that's what it is. So that's what we'll put on there. And that's all I got for mapping updates. So,
Do we have a plan going forward on how to get those updates? And, I mean, I know you're doing it, but it is not your map, it is our map. So
Right.
do you guys want to try to find a way to get people here to our next meeting or something? Like, if that map needs to go somewhere soon, we may want to identify some key players in town and invite them to our next meeting and have a draft up. Be like, what do you guys think about this? I mean, at some point, we need to be proactive. I mean, I've heard comments from people on this group that are not happy with it, so we can't just sit back. We have to act and do something, move forward with that. So I think the map is gonna be a great tool, but it's not done. And it's not Darcy's job to say it's done and not done. It's our group, it's our map, it's the town's map, so.
Yeah.
Is there specific regions we're looking for here in town?
There's a lot of that's not done. The Western Bay is really not.
yeah, the
done.
Western Bay's pretty sparse, and some of the upper regions are kind of not as well filled in.
So,
Do you want to try to get a couple of days to go running around town?
Yeah, I can't do much. George would be the one to talk to about the Prince, about the Western Bay, but I can cover stuff and anything in the New Meadows, anything east of the islands, I can cover.
Yeah, the New Meadows we did pretty well with that, but any extra data, anybody that thinks that,
The bogey saying and lobster and the west is, and Chris could clarify that and George.
I tried talking to Chris, I think he's in,
Florida.
why, he's in Florida now? He was?
Chris here or Chris Hole?
Chris Hole.
He's in Florida.
Oh, he was just deer hunting last week in what,
Yeah.
Illinois, something like that.
His dad's not well, so he's out of town, but, he would be a really, really important to get information in that bay, because that bay is not done, and there's gonna be a lot of pressure over there. There's LPAs on our next meeting, there's LPAs and leases, and I know that I don't feel comfortable with the map right now, so, but I don't have the information. We need to find the people that do have the information and get it on the map.
yeah, and I don't think we need to wait for another meeting to have them come, like, let's get them in between, like, if you know who it is, or you have a little collection of guys you can go see, bring the little handouts and have them do it, and I'll meet you and pick them up from you and put them in,
Right.
so it would be nice to have a more updated map to look at the next meeting,
Yeah.
and obviously still invite people, but if we can scrape some more folks up to add more stuff to it between now and then, that would be great. Now that the bulk of it's done, it doesn't take me that long to add updates to it, so
Right.
whatever you guys can get to me, I'll immediately add it, and we'll have an updated version, hopefully in January, that would be maybe ready to go to a public hearing at that point, if we all agree, like, okay, this looks pretty good.
Yep. And do we have all the names of the people that have,
Yep, I have everybody's
so if we
names.
do more people, we should write that down?
Yes,
so that-
anyone that participates, I definitely want to capture their name so that we can show DMR that we did our due diligence and talk to our guys here.
Just looking at DMR's data for the lobster fishery that they sent me with the 10-minute squares around Harpswell, they have basically anything within a mile of Harpswell has 5,000, the maximum number of traps. It's
Well, that's what
right.
it looks like when you get to that outer section. It's basically all lobster gear, and there's just maybe little tiny tracks and holes here and there where maybe someone could put something, but we still need to get it down and get it documented, show that we did the work.
Just as a heads up, I sent everybody an email that was sent to me about a request for fish farms. And I noticed that Harpswell was listed on that list, but just something for you guys to go over for the next round. I don't know if this Lincoln Milstein has approached the town at all.
What, you mean like a land-based fish farm?
I've sent a couple emails to him trying to get some more, deeper information on this. I just thought it was funny because this is just strictly talking about fish farms. And I just thought it was funny that nobody really talked about it here in town, and then this document comes flying across my desk. But I sent it to everybody and he wants to take a peek at.
You just sent it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Want to move on to legislative stuff? You good with that?
Yeah. So our plan is basically just, each of us can go out and try to get people.
Yep, hustle some more info, get it to me.
Before the next meeting, let's hustle.
Yep. Give me little paper maps, give me another big map, whatever format you can get it in, and I'll get it added in, I'll come meet you, or you can bring it here to the town and say, hey, there's some stuff at the town for you to pick up, and I'll come get it and add it.
Do you want to advertise for one last meetup hoorah somewhere for these guys to have an opportunity?
I think, I don't know,
You think
it
it's-
feels like coming up to the holidays and stuff, it's gonna be harder to get people to peel away for that, but if we can, I think we're down to like tracking people down individually. We all kind of know who we need to talk to, so let's just get them and have them either look at what's there and be like, yeah, that looks good, or just hand them a blank map and say, put your stuff on here. I don't,
Is there any way you can forward what you have to the group?
Yeah, I can send
So we
you-
can kind of see where the blank spots are?
yep, I can forward you guys a PDF of what we
Yeah.
have, and then you can kind of zoom in on it on your little phone.
Yeah, it will work.
And see. And that might, like, some of these guys might be like, yeah, that's good, but I suspect there's a bunch of area that still needs some detail added to it, so I'd like to ideally get that added in before our next meeting, so that we've got something pretty close to done in January.
And our meeting in January is January 8th, so you would need it probably a week before that?
Yeah, that's plenty of time. Which I know runs us right up to like New Year's and Christmas, but I can still be doing stuff like a couple days before if it turns into that, but I'd love to have it before New Year's if we can manage that.
Are we gonna stick with the 3:30 meetings?
You want to? Probably get some more done.
Yeah.
I'm good with it.
This draft map that the anchor was asking for, is that?
Yeah,
have you-
that's
has
our
it been
stuff.
updated?
That's our stuff, because it's got, I don't want to clutter it up with like, I'll take the aquaculture farms off of it.
Okay.
I just want the guys looking at their fishing areas.
Gotcha,
I don't
okay.
want them distracted with anything else on there.
Okay,
So I'll resend you a PDF of that
gotcha.
as soon as I get home.
And do you have the information that Matt sent us about the, what'd you send us? You sent us the pogie fishing?
I mean,
Hoagie
yeah,
lobster in the-
it basically just says like high-density area, the entire town of Harpswell. So that's not really anything to map necessarily. It's more stuff to bring up, like that kind of thing we're gonna have to go with, like at the public hearing, the Pogie guys should,
But I mean, if you look
Point
at
out.
the heat map for just like lobstering, for example, it's the highest
yeah.
density like around Harpswell. And I'll use myself for example. I don't fish those waters. I'm out in the yellow and
Yeah.
less orange areas. So I mean, they are
Yeah.
extremely high density areas.
And I mean, if that may be like, it could be we're at the point where it is what it is, and there's not a lot more room left to put any more aquaculture stuff in Harpswell, other than a few small things, but we're doing our job to like document that that's the case, and it's not just our opinion or grumpy people complaining or anything like that, that we're doing it the right way, and whatever the facts are the facts, when we get it all put together.
There's a 250,000 lobster traps
Yeah.
off the town of Harpswell.
That's
Just to
it?
kind of put it in perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I feel obligated and, especially where I sit on the Marine Resource Committee, it's not just the Shellfish Committee, it's a Marine Resource, and I have to honor existing fisheries. How could I not?
Yeah. Well, we really need to be thinking about this as the working waterfront community. So it's got to be everybody that works here, and if there's room for a few more people, great. But if there's not, we got to explain why, and that's just how it is.
I guess that's where my whole issue with aquaculture has always come in, is all the other fisheries, share. Like they don't have a deed to a certain spot in the ocean, And aquaculture is the only fishery that gets a said deed and doesn't have to share with the others. It forces the others out. You know, like if there was a way, like this is never how the ocean has ever worked, ever, in the history of man. You know, it's always been shared by the users, and that's my biggest problem is the state is selling off the public's resource. You know, and we've been sharing it for thousands and thousands of years. You know, and now all of a sudden, like Jerry has said and others have said, there's this new guy in town that's coming in and forcing the others out, and it doesn't matter if they're there or not. They get to buy it out from under them. It's a hard pill to swallow.
Well,
I mean, to his point, I mean, rationally, how do we give back licenses? You know, so many have to go out before so many come in. You know, same thing with the ground fishery, there's only so many permits with so much allocation. You know, we're already, in the other management schemes, we already take into consideration the effects of the resource. You know, what's too much? I guess that was been the biggest question that kind of was the highlight that scares most people. You know, where do we draw the line? And I think with our case, you know, showing that 1/7 of all aquaculture is here in this town, coastline of Maine is very big.
Yeah, if you look at the two maps that he got us, the red, the lobster and the pogie ones, it shows the highest of the dead. You just look at those, like, that's not the place to go, because there's, most of the stuff's right there, so.
That was brought up at the council, that a lot of the bait fish have been tight to shore.
Yeah.
And cutting off access, it's bad enough we can't even get federal, you know, in New Hampshire, Maine to get inside because of the lobster density. You know, we're missing large windows of data, which goes back to the recruitment models, because we base things on age classes. So if the model can't find an age class, well, that dictates allocation for the rest of the fisheries, which does officially have impact on infrastructure and bait markets that go to one of our largest industries here in the state.
well, if we could move to the legislative update, because I think what the mapping is all about is showing where those fisheries are. And the state regulation about aquaculture is that unreasonable term that Matt was asking about last.
I think if we could
It's-
define that, we
it's
could
not
solve a lot of
defined.
these problems.
Is not defined, so that's an issue, but it's already a criteria that you can't interfere unreasonably. So we as a group said, let's map, let's show where our fisheries are, because there is a lot of pressure. And the other thing I've been hearing loud and clear is more municipal input. It is state regulation, it is state waters, as I've said every single time. But we want to, I think we had a great meeting, in my opinion, with DMR. I felt like we were listened to. But we've got the regulations that exist. So, Representative Allison Hepler is the chair of the Marine Resources Committee, and hopefully will be this session as well.
We don't
Hasn't-
know yet, hasn't gotten any word yet.
The news is coming, but that's the hope. And Cameron Rennie, who is the Senate co-chair, hopefully will be, every session it can change, but they typically don't take people out of chairs. So Alice and I have been talking a lot. Allison's been working like crazy on this. And all of you got a copy of a draft that I was proposing for a possible bill. And that's the title, this is draft, so nothing's in stone anywhere. An act to improve municipal participation in and reduce potential conflicts with aquaculture lease applications. And then again, felt like low-hanging fruit was, we learned that experimental leases don't require a pre-application process in the same way that standard do. So this is just that experimental would also require a pre-application process. Now meanwhile, Allison's been talking with the department, and we've been talking a lot. And there are other possibilities beyond this. I think that having put a proposal that the department's aware of makes them pay attention, which isn't a bad thing. And do you want to give any feedback?
Yeah, I mean, Where do I have my notes from like all over the page here, so. I asked about how come the experimental leases don't have a pre-application, and what they said was it's limited, I mean, it's limited in size, it's also limited in time, and so they thought and they already meet with, I mean, the DMR meets with the applicant before that's why it's called a pre-app, before the application is approved, and so I said, well, why not add this to the experimental leases? And with the idea being that, you know, to get back to the title, which is to improve municipal participation, you know, it's another opportunity for the town to interact with somebody who is potentially applying. They came back with the idea of, I mean, if the goal is to to improve or improve municipal participation, could this be accomplished by anybody who's in that stage, right, who's in the pre-app process, that they would send you their name? And so if the town wanted to reach out, and so it would be part of a, you know, sort of a scoping session, but mostly just sort of a, like, here, we want you to be involved in this. But to be honest, what they didn't want was to add this requirement, which can be done in regulation, it does not need a statute change, that they set up this meeting, which and then towns don't show up at these, you know, the town doesn't show up at these meetings.
I was gonna say, maybe we can modify, because I talked to Sebastian about this too, and he had concerns that, like, you're adding, you know, more layers to the aquaculture
Yeah.
process, which, as an aquaculturist, you know,
Yeah.
3 years to get your lease is a lengthy process already. But I would say, one of the things I thought about is if we can add in language which says, if a town has an aquaculture working group or makes the request to be notified of and meet with them, like, you can put it on the towns, because I know we would want to do it, but maybe, you know, some town way down east really doesn't care what's going on. You don't want to add that burden to them and get everybody spun up and have a mandatory collection of people if it's not necessary. So I would say if we can add in language to make it, you know, at whatever, a list of towns that are, you know, requesting to be notified or to be part of the process, that's more of a, we opt in instead of
Yeah.
everybody's included and you have
Yeah.
to, you know what I'm saying?
Yep, yep.
I don't quite know how to word that.
Well, no, I
but-
think that's what they were also saying.
Yeah.
Right, is that it would be one thing, you know, you guys are obviously interested in that, but like, how many other towns?
Right,
are?
right.
And
We don't
so
want to put the
add
burden on the other
layer.
towns and waste resources for
Yeah.
places where they really don't care, but I
Well, it
think,
also guarantees opposition if it's required as
Yeah.
opposed to permissive. So we talked a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
about that, how to, the towns, I mean, I would think they would be interested, but
give them the option.
give them the
Yeah.
option.
And maybe, if you get a list of, you get a couple of places and you see where this is gonna be, maybe you and/or this committee decide, oh, we don't really need to meet with him at this stage, we'll talk with him later or something like that, but they said it would be really easy to just send an email out to the, I think, I assume the harbor masters are the point of contact
Usually,
for this, yeah?
yeah.
Or the select board and.
So they're saying we don't need legislation, they would just like it to be like a voluntary. part of
Yeah,
the
and they could
process.
add that to regulation under the experimental lease, because that's
And this
where.
is who saying this?
This was people from DMR.
Really?
Oh.
Because she didn't say that when she was here, but
Well, not on this, we didn't talk about this particular proposal then.
I mean, she talked about experimental and she said it's not included, but if you're
Right.
saying we don't have to just change the state law, we can just ask for it, I mean, that's pretty big.
Well, I think what they're saying is not to change it in,
In
that it would be
statute.
required, but to figure out a way that towns have the option to,
So what,
Right.
who's figuring that out then? Is that?
Well, I think we ought
that's
to
the point.
chat about that.
Okay.
That's a lot easier than changing
Yeah.
state law.
Well, exactly,
And less aggressive.
yeah,
You may see.
That's all we
some of
want,
these-
we just want input,
Yeah.
yeah,
really.
I mean, if that's the case, you may see some of these municipalities retract their moratorium,
Yeah.
Yeah,
because they've been put in a corner. That's why a lot of these towns have,
It's defensive
That's
on their
really good
part.
news.
It's not,
Yeah.
yeah.
so
Thank
what
you
are
for
the
that.
things?
Well, if the goal is more participation.
Yeah.
That's what that's what I
all we want.
heard.
But
That's
is-
what's wanted.
How many are experiment, I mean, one of the questions that I had is like, where are towns missing on the participation? Is
It's,
it on state?
so it's only in the experimental leases, but I think
Okay.
first, like, for example, one of the farmers that I work with on another project, I had told him about this, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna put in an experimental lease in Harpswell, can I see that map? And I'm like, yeah, come to my house.
Yeah,
And I pulled
okay.
it up, and where he wants to go is kind of tucked in near the Bowdoin Sailing Center, like
Yeah,
on the shore side between like where Dog's Head is and the
Yeah.
docks for Bowdoin, which doesn't show that there's anybody doing stuff there, but I'm like, well, what you would do is come to our group and
Yeah.
show that this is
Right.
where you want to go, and then the guys can double check and make sure nobody pogies through there or, whatever else, because the map was in a draft state. I'm like, there's nothing there now, but we don't have it completely done. So they are still kind of ongoing. It would just be nice to standardize the process. And then I think once people know that that's how it's going to work, I think we can head off a lot more issues, because it really sucks when some applicant doesn't find out until the public hearing process that they need to make these changes, and they already plunked down their $1,500 for their application, and now they gotta go back to square one and resubmit the money and make the changes. It's just good for.
go ahead.
Well, that's the other thing that I'm always thinking about, that example of the kelp farm, I think, where if they could pull the stuff out,
Yeah.
nobody would have a problem, but they would have to go through the whole process again. Would this, whatever we figure out, would this take care of that?
In theory, yeah, like, they're missing this input in the whole
Right.
system right now, I
And
feel
that
like.
would be huge, I
Yeah.
think. for
And I think
everybody.
even though it is part of the LPAs and the standard leases, I don't think we're taking advantage fully necessarily. Like,
Yeah.
now that we have this group convened,
Yeah, that was the other question I had, like, to what extent is this just about experimental leases, or is it just sort of?
we would like to have
general?
this much input on all of
Right.
the leases. And technically, we could with the other two, like, the regulation is
Right.
there where we can turn it into our own, whatever, pre-application meeting with this group if we want to. It's just that no one's really doing that right now, and
What's your participation with scoping sessions?
it's just the
Pretty small.
it's the
Yeah.
DMR and probably the HARP.
Well, DMR doesn't even attend those.
Yeah, they set it up, don't they? Oh, no, they
No,
don't.
it's
hoping they don't.
That's
No,
right.
They're
they
two
don't.
different things, or.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
Pre-application they do,
Yeah.
scoping they don't.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It really makes no sense to me where we're open for more involvement, we're requesting for more involvement, but yet all we're doing is abiding by that criteria listed DMR as structured. When it comes, you cannot impede existing fisheries.
Yeah.
I think we need
It's
to
not a map
define
shows
that.
it.
Well, I mean, she told us, the burden of proof, but we can find that. You just have to have
Yeah.
a group willing to go get the answers. Like, You
Yeah.
have to be involved, you have to,
Yeah.
you can't just let it ride. I mean, it's on the town, and if there's a formal group, and this happens for every one of them,
Yeah.
we need to go get the information. If we care about it, we just have to get the information, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent.
And she said that probably 3 times, context, we
Yeah.
need context.
Yeah.
Not just their
Right.
other fisheries, but context.
Which context and reasonableness go hand in hand,
Yep.
because you
Yep.
can't just say, I fished there in the last 10 years, at some point I fished
Yep.
there. Like, there's no way that's reasonable. to
Well,
the
and
average
as we
person.
start going through this, we're gonna document and keep all of this stuff. We'll just keep building our file, basically, for the town of Harpswell with all this information. So we can keep adding to it. If there's, stuff to add to the map with more context, then we'll add it in there. So I think this is a really positive direction for us to take. It's kind of just like, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense why there hasn't been this level of local input built into the process
Yeah.
from the beginning.
Well,
It's
I
kinda
don't think
backward.
people felt the need
Maybe,
until pretty
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah.
Because
Maybe.
there is a lot of growth.
yeah.
Do you know, have you reached out to other towns to find out what other,
My friend who was here at our last meeting is from Port Clyde, and she's on their comprehensive planning committee, and they're very interested in what we're doing, because they're the same way. They have a robust heritage fishery community, but they also are trying to figure out how to make sure aquaculture grows carefully and thoughtfully, and there's no roadmap for that. It's not really laid out well how to do that, and we're one of the only groups that's kind of figuring it out, so. She was bringing back kind of our strategy to their
Okay.
town to work on. And then I suspect once we get out there more, I would imagine all the towns in Casco Bay would probably
Yeah.
have a similar interest, but
I mean, is there like
Can
a,
I-
like, oh,
I was just gonna ask Abby, who's everywhere doing everything, do you
Oh,
have any
Abby.
response to that? What other towns are doing on this? Are you aware of anything?
No, I think
Different,
that's,
okay.
you summarized it pretty well, apart from the Georgetown effort.
Yeah,
And I know in Vinyl Haven, they also talked about developing a, aquaculture operation through their co-op, so.
there's no direct, like, network of
Well, that's what I was
communication.
wondering,
It's
like,
kind of, it doesn't
you know,
really
is there-
exist,
well,
yeah.
there's a harbor, I mean, I assume there's a harbor masters association
Yep.
that,
We talk about these things, and we talk about it locally, but
yeah,
Harpswell right now is the only town that has anything like this pulled together.
yeah.
And I doubt the whole state is watching our little, Facebook streaming meetings, so,
oh,
I think DMR is paying it.
maybe, yeah. But, we're making progress, and if we can get that accomplished by making sure that this group has input on every single lease of every type that wants to come into Harpswell, it's gonna solve,
you'll also have a better overview
Yeah.
that way
Yeah.
too.
yeah.
I've been 2 years verbally with my concerns, and finally, thank God, we are here.
Yep, well, and then that's the
Because
thing,
I-
it's been on
for the past 2
individuals.
years, I've been a disgruntled
Yeah.
shellfisherman.
Yeah,
For real.
No, I know.
I'm labeled, I'm still labeled disgruntled fisherman.
Yeah.
They're eating clams, and it's like, no, there's a lot more life than just shellfish out there in that water.
Yeah.
Um,
I think we did it right by bringing this group together of like all the different
That's the
people.
only way it was
and-
gonna happen.
Yep,
Yeah.
But I think last week, or last month, it was really great. She told us the information we needed to get. I mean, she's like, this is the
Yeah.
answer to the test.
Yeah.
If we don't have the answer, like she said,
But
make sure we get the information and give it to Paul, and then send it,
Yeah.
and then it has to be very specific. It has to be evidence-based and specific. Like, we have to get that information, and then they'll use it. But if we just say, I fished there, that's not enough.
yep. Like the Furta Farms application, if we want to start collecting information about that area, real information, people who fish, or the poggy toes, or whatever,
Got real
get it all ready so that, I mean, we can't like, this process is going to be beginning whenever, after the legislative session, but, so stuff that's already in flow, we can't necessarily change, but there'll be a public hearing for that, and that'll be the time to bring all of that stuff and have it, but not like on the fly in the moment, if we have it all ready, which should be the other task of this group, is to be, let's make sure that we've got all the information. We should, I would say someone from this group, at least one person, should be attending any public hearing for the aquaculture stuff that's going on. I mean, David, you probably already do anyway, for the most part.
I do too.
Yeah.
I
So,
would assume that, even though I understand that DMR is not gonna host your map, I would assume that anytime they got an application, they would say, look,
she sounded like they were willing to do that, and I would love to see them do that
Yeah.
and have a nice, I was gonna talk to you about, do you guys have a GIS person now or not on the town staff?
No.
All right, well, we'll fix something up so that we've got a comparable map with the same input feeds of the data sources that the DMR uses. Basically, it'll be just like the one that they put on their state website with all the same, I know where all those data feeds are from, so we can set ours up that way with the addition of our fishing map.
So what Amanda Ellis had said was, she thinks what the town is doing is really good, having this map.
Yeah.
But that's where she said there needs to be context. So
Right.
this group, other fishermen, anyone else can weigh in,
Mm-hmm.
and we as a town can submit that on behalf of the fishermen, outlining like, hey, we have this map, but X, Y, and Z, they said, here's the context.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she says, great, keep going, but they're not gonna just take the map as evidence.
No.
It's-
right,
He
it's-
fishes here, she fishes
Right.
here, this time of year, this many traps,
Right.
like, but we can get that. We just need more time than 1 month. We
Yeah.
can't,
Right.
we need to extend that, we need to have it for 2 months at
it's
least.
like sort of notes, if you look at on the planning board, right, where you get these
Yeah.
maps, and then there's all these notes that
Right.
sort of, I would assume
Exactly.
that's what you're talking about,
I mean, the neighbor can't just say, hey, I don't wanna see it. It's like, you need to give, like, I don't wanna see it because.
Yeah,
Well, and as
evidence-based.
Paul said, I fished there 10 years ago. It's current, what's going on now, documented. At the right time, she also, and that is a read through the municipal participation. You got to do it before the deadline.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to pay attention to that. Paul, for the LPAs come to Harbor and Waterways?
Subtitle goes to harbor and waterfront, and intertidal goes to marine resources.
And did you have to do a town ordinance for that to happen, or is?
We changed the language to say that the Harbor and Waterfront Committee can assist the harbor master in review of aquaculture. And we left it as aquaculture, not LPA or
Yeah.
these.
Yep.
So that
Okay.
would cover,
Yeah,
So it basically just, if someone were to say, why do I have to wait for this to go to the Harbor and Waterfront Committee? Why can't, basically, if they wanted to go over staff's head, go right to DMR and say, the town's being unreasonable, they're waiting until Harbor and Waterfront Committee, which is a month away.
yeah.
We now have an ordinance that says, hey. you
That's
know,
how it is.
That's our policy.
And has there been any problem with
No,
that?
zero. No, and in fact, actually, most applicants are in favor of it.
Yeah,
They
I
like
would
coming and
think so.
explaining
well, I would think
themselves.
so, yeah.
They don't want the conflict either, I would
No,
think.
no one wants the conflict,
Right.
like, that's the irony.
Well, I know
Everybody
one-
just wants to be able to do their jobs, but the system isn't really designed for that to work well right now.
So, does it, you were talking about coming to this committee, but are we talking about this would come, this is a working group, would it still be Harbor and Waterways or Marine Resources, is that?
So until the select board make this, and if they make this a full-blown committee, it would continue to go to Harbor and Waterfront.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it needs to be, I'm just asking.
Why, they,
I think they want this to end.
has that been,
But you cost him too much money.
The town's got no money.
you mean that this working group turning it into a committee?
Yeah, this is.
If they were to turn into a committee, I think this would be the appropriate place
Right,
for
but it's a
applications
working
to
group.
go.
This has a time limit on it. We have to
Right.
change.
Right.
Yeah.
Working
Because
group is
before
just
they- Before they turned it into an aquaculture committee, we've already requested a fisherman's committee, and this was gonna be one of our first topics, was aquaculture. And we are gonna form another committee, then it,
Well, why don't we just make this the working waterfront group, I mean, and cover
Yeah.
all of it?
That's
yeah,
probably-
working waterfront committee.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting this should,
Yeah, and I'm not saying, let me backtrack. I'm not saying the select board is going to make this a full-time
Right.
committee. I'm just saying, until they got to that point where they would,
Yeah.
applications will still go to Harbor and Waterfront.
Yeah, because if they're gonna, then this should be titled a fisherman's committee. And the first topic on the table was aquaculture. It was requested, yeah, quite some time before the idea of this group was,
A year ago.
Yeah,
Well, I
well, this
think
was
that-
just a reaction to the moratorium issue, like
Yeah.
some solution other than
those
trying.
moratoriums are set in place because you've seen municipalities put in a corner. They know
Yeah.
that they don't have no other option but,
well, we're saying yes, you do. We're
Right,
gonna
which
make
is
sure
what
we do.
this is trying to prevent.
I think we're just, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but we're still missing a key part of this. Like, we can do all this, get it in context and do all that, but that doesn't matter when they don't have a definition on what unreasonable is or what that context is, because it's one person making that decision, as we well know, and that's Pat right now. And Pat is a reasonable person, but like Jerry presented, Pat's not gonna be there forever, so if we get an aquaculturist or a lobsterman, that sways one way or the other, all of a sudden, well, there's 8 lobstermen here, but I like aquaculturists, so I'm gonna let him go. Well, there's 1 lobsterman here, and there's 6 aquaculturists around him, but I like lobstermen, so we can have no more.
Well,
Like,
so-
they're,
I'm gonna throw this out there and say, like, I feel like the mapping process was kind of task A for this group. And I think there's a full plate of task B, which is deciding what type of work we need to do to figure out carrying capacities for different areas, which is a lot of work. But I think that's what we have to tackle next. I don't know how long everybody wants to hang on being on this working group, but getting those types of studies done is what's gonna be able to drive, in the same way this map gave DMR some definition and improved the context that we're able to say, hey, these are fishing areas. If we've got that type of work done, it might help in actually creating definitions for
how many fishermen is it okay to displace for an aquaculture farm?
none. I mean,
Why can't we add something like that into
well,
the definition?
I don't know, I don't wanna go back and fight battles that like have been, just done to death and nobody's won. Why don't we find new territory where we can figure out some stuff and bring it to the table, like we did with this? I mean,
Well, and carrying capacity, there are studies going on.
yeah, I called FB Environmental because I wanted to find out what their strategy was. I haven't got a call back from them yet, but the Waldeboro thing looked interesting.
So I don't know, Paul, were you able to talk to Max from MCOG?
Yep, so Mary Ann and I met with FB Environmental and Max from MCOG. We have the Waldeboro study right here, I can forward it to the group.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
And we met with David this afternoon before this meeting, and so we are going to pursue doing a similar study, the Marine Resource Committee, doing a similar study with FB in different areas around
Excellent.
Harpswell.
What is it
Yeah.
called? FB?
I'd love to read that, because I also talked to John
SB.
Soules since our last meeting, to just kind of get his input and take on things, and if he would be maybe interested in helping us design some stuff that was specific to Harpswell. And we had a great conversation, he definitely is, so I'd like for us to make, I know that's gonna be expensive if we just do whatever they're doing, so if we can identify like what specific questions we're trying to answer, we may be able to get those questions answered more economically. I can tap a variety of different types of grants or,
Well, Mary Ann's our grant wizard, and she has high hopes that we can find some good funding.
all right, good. Let's be thoughtful and
Yeah.
do this the best way possible and get the most information for Harpswell, that's
And
specific to
MCOG has
Harpswell.
offered to submit applications
Yes.
for us without charging us, so there's a lot of interest. It isn't just David asking about carrying capacity, there's a lot of interest.
Right.
Well, it's
So-
the next piece. It's like the next thing to figure
Yeah.
out, like,
Yeah.
all right, so you could fit one here, but is that a good idea?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, getting more information.
Just because you can, doesn't mean you should.
Yes.
So the other piece that I forgot, is there, any of you attend the Aquaculture Advisory Council?
I lurk on it, I listen
Okay.
in.
Because the next, so the first thing they mentioned about regulation is that, well, you should come to the next meeting, which is in January.
Yeah.
And like I said, even though just having this optional thing rather than making it, adding this to the whole experimental lease regulation to make it more informal, like we've just been talking about, I think it would be an opportunity for other people on the advisory council to talk about this and sort of see what else they're hearing. I think whatever other opportunities, other towns that are doing this would kind of give some oomph to writing.
I mostly agree, but I feel like the Aquaculture Advisory Committee it's essentially like the horse has already left the barn. Like, those are full-blown aquaculturists, already in
Yeah,
business. They're dealing with different sets of problems than the type of stuff that we're talking about, so.
Okay. That's interesting, because you and I sort of said that, because, we looked at the list and was like, oh, yeah, these are all.
Yeah, they don't have problems with like, how do I get my farm started? They all have farms, most of them big farms, and they're dealing with like, seed supply and, regulations from
Yeah, I've
DMR
never
over their
attended one of
stuff.
those.
So, yeah, it's still nice to maybe keep them in the loop as part of the
Yeah.
overall working waterfront community,
Yeah.
but I don't know that that's,
Well, my experience with it is DMR, if they're thinking about some changes, will bring it there.
yeah.
To kind of talk about it with them and get feedback.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want them to say no, and I don't think they can say no. It's up to what we propose and the
Yeah.
department does. I'm a little hesitant that it's as informal as we're talking about. would
I am
love to
too,
see
like,
it.
I just want to make sure we don't like get all excited and be like, yay, we solved it, and then we
Yeah.
find out like, no, we didn't, we just got screwed
I
out
would
of
love
it.
to see it, if not in law, as a regulation.
Yeah.
which
If
is
someone
in
could
law.
explain like how it's gonna be
Yeah,
memorialized so that it
Maybe
actually
that's
works
a
the way we
good
want it to
agenda
work, that would be
question.
great.
yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to, Jay and I just talked about this week, and so I haven't had a chance to
Well, the
talk to-
regulation idea sounded, if it doesn't need a bill, you don't have to get a bill passed. It goes into regulation. You
It's a first
probably
step.
don't even have to
Yeah.
vote on it.
Right,
But then the idea of notification, I thought, well, that's interesting,
yeah.
but what if it doesn't happen? You have nothing to
Right.
go
Right.
back on.
Right.
Right, exactly.
Who's gonna be in charge of making sure that the
Yeah.
town is notified?
And if it isn't Pat Kelleher anymore, and someday it won't be.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we need to get an answer to, how are we gonna be sure?
Well, how are you sure now? How do you ensure that LPAs and standard lease, that all that stuff gets to you?
It's in chapter 2, like they have
It
to
is
do
in
it.
statute?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to.
Okay,
Yeah, that's this part.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, I see what you mean.
Paul, I have a quick question. The unreasonable thing that Matt's talking about, obviously, there's been leases approved and not approved. So there's obviously some cases that we can look at being like, all right, this was approved, but these fishermen said they fished there and they still approved it. Like, is there a way to get a copy of those?
Didn't she send you some? Did Amanda send you some cases?
She said she was going to, I haven't seen them, but
Whatever she sent me, I forwarded to you guys, but I don't think those weren't cases.
I would love to see an example or a few of those, and then maybe ask Pat, like, Pat, why did you approve this, even though that 5 fishermen said they fished there? Like, I
think
don't know
it
if your
like,
conversation with him talked about that at all, but
Yeah,
but there's evidence, right? There's evidence of things being approved and not approved. with-
Then the conversation we had, I was asking him, where is the criteria checklist? I mean, if somebody has a hair across their butt, I go and comes back at him saying, well, this is disproportionate. I go, how do you weight that? I go, 5 fishermen and 3 seiners, and let's just say 2 recreational fishermen in our area. I go, how do you justify removing the one for the others?
Right.
You know, where is the criteria?
I'd love to see that case. I'd love to read it.
Well, he was giving me case specifics, you know, that was the rationale with him, you know, he talked to the fishermen in the area, looked at each of the details, you know, in some cases, he slid the lease back 100 feet or
Right.
shifted it 50 feet for the coexistence of the others. But like I asked him, I go, so there is no definition in criteria. I go, so pretty much it's at the leisure of whoever's in charge. Like I told him, I go, hence is kind of the issue.
it's a lot of power for one person.
No, I agree. I just want to know.
Well, just
Did I know
understanding the
it when I
process,
see it?
it goes through multiple hearing officers, because there has to be a hearing officer that writes it up for Pat. And then it goes through, they bounce it off each other, and then it goes through, at this point, Amanda, because she's the director, and then ultimately Pat.
Right.
Right.
She said.
I mean, so it does go through a handful, but again,
But Pat can trump all
Pat,
of them.
he can, absolutely.
And I believe there has been at least one case, I think Mere Point, there was over 10 fishermen that spoke against Mere Point, and Pat overrode them.
So that's what I was gonna send, I'll send to everybody.
That's a big one.
In the lease decision, and hopefully I'm not gonna be wrong on this one, but they put in there the evidence that was brought to the department, and they'll put in their lease decision why they chose to either go against or go with that evidence. So I'll download that, I think it's all on their website, and send it to everybody.
Because I mean, when they do that, they create precedent, you know, so,
Well, that's just it, yeah. I mean,
Right.
That being like.
but I mean, I'll have to dig through it because I know I can find, there's been other leases that have been denied that only had 1 fisherman complaining. You know, so why wasn't that one granted, but the one with 10 was? You know, I think they'd have to be looked at on an individual basis, but I think we can get away from all that by defining some sort of criteria. You know, and that takes, that creates a checklist, and that would make it easier for everybody involved, the aquaculturists, because they could look at that checklist before and go, yeah, I'll meet all these, you know, or no, I'm not gonna meet this. You know, it'd save everybody time, money, and it'd make it fair and equitable for everyone that way. Right now, you're leaving the decision up to somebody's interpretation, and that changes as the people change. And as we all know, the people, you guys know it as well, the government's changing all the time, every 2 years, you know?
So
So-
are you talking about specifically that unreasonable term? Is
Or
that
just,
what's
I think
defined?
I think there needs to be more
Some
criteria
way of judging.
established, you know, that can be looked at by somebody kind of coming in off the street and go, all right, it checks boxes A, B, and C, you know, this is okay, it can go there, or it doesn't check box. Like, I don't think that's something unreasonable, to use their own word.
Well, I
That was good.
I had to come up with. I know, I can talk like a politician.
It's catching.
Now I lost my own train of thought.
Contagious. is the other, yeah, not a good way.
But if you have that criteria written in statute, it doesn't matter who comes in. They can look at that criteria and they can look at any application that comes in, and it either meets it or it doesn't. It gets rid of that interpretation. I think that eliminates a lot of the conflict too, because I think that's where because my interpretation is that I'm the best lobsterman in Harpswell, and Sammy's interpretation is that she's the best aquaculturist in Harpswell. You know, like, neither one of us may be wrong, but if there's criteria established, you don't get into those tiffs.
Did you raise this with Amanda?
I asked it
So-
several different ways, and
Yeah.
she was a better politician than myself.
Well, the term in-law is unreasonable.
Yeah.
Right.
And unless that
Context.
changes, that's what we've got.
In law?
In-law.
Oh,
Are the
not-
criteria for
Oh, okay.
aquaculture. Yeah. I mean, they're unreasonable
Is that guy even
interference
real?
with other fisheries, unreasonable.
That's what I was questioning. I was like,
That
what
looks
is
like an
this?
AI thing.
That's what I thought at first when it was sent to me.
Sorry.
So, well, it's only 20 hours. I thought it
No,
was.
450.
Yeah.
Okay. So, carrying capacity, Marine Resources is gonna be working on something specific to here. MCOG is working with this environmental group in Waldoboro area.
Yep.
And there are other studies out there.
The Schiller Center's in the process of doing a carrying capacity study right now as
Oh,
well.
really?
It's done on a very small scale.
I
So
think we have
all
to
of
be
those-
careful too, though. I think Harpswell needs some really specific stuff. We have more
Definitely.
diverse types of areas just within our town boundaries than some of these towns have like one kind of
You should, because
situation.
you have
And
this coastline is-
I think we're gonna need more work
Yeah, we
in a
talked
lot of
about it. It
areas.
can't be, David and I talked earlier. If you choose a site in Middle Bay, you can't use that evidence for something in New Meadows.
Right.
Right.
Like, it's gonna have to be multiple sites.
Yep,
And that's why studies in different areas are good anyway.
yep.
You know, different parts of Hartford,
Carrying
but different
capacity.
areas, because it gives more validity. So the other is this idea of experimental leases, every lease, every license requiring municipal input. And I was particularly concerned about if we're gonna try for a law, closure is January 10th. Has to go in before then,
Just
or.
2 days after your meeting.
We could still
Our
do
next
concept
one
draft,
is-
right?
Oh, yeah, right.
I'm not going near that. Maybe in my last term, but I ain't that stupid. God, was that on?
Don't worry about it. We're
Take
we're
notes.
fishermen, we can.
Is there anything else we want to ask or do? No, she's here. I mean, is
Well,
there-
that's the thing, I was, I've been saying all along, we need to do something legislatively. A change in regulation is a change legislatively. If we feel comfortable that we're gonna be notified of every lease, that's legislative, but are we? What would it mean that they would send an email to Paul or a town that doesn't have a harbor master, but the selectmen do the,
Or the DMR tells the applicant, okay, make sure you notify the town, and no one follows up to see
Yeah.
if they actually did that.
You don't
Yeah.
want, yes, you don't
Yeah.
want that to happen.
yeah. So, I'd be most comfortable if it's not a proposal like this, which you could do, as Billy said, easier if you don't have to do that.
That fixes the one problem, but, you know.
Well, yeah, and that's, as Darcy said, like the maps are an early step, this is an early step.
Yeah.
Can we find out, are they saying they would put it in regulation? Sounded like yes, but maybe not.
Yeah, I think as it got more informal, rather than requiring doing it just like this, it got more, because again, they were saying, well, okay, we'll put this in, we're already gonna meet with them, and then there's an additional opportunity for the town, but they don't show up, right? I think that's,
We want it to be an opt-in thing
Right,
for towns.
Well,
yeah,
I'd rather have it, whatever way we can get it, if it's opt-in or opt-out, but and this town needs it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if it comes down to that, I just opt in, whatever,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we're gonna opt in, but.
right. But how to memorialize, that's a great word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want them to pat us on the head and say, nice job, guys, and then like nothing actually gets changed and all this time was wasted, so.
Yeah, we want to get some assurance that,
Yeah, I am away for the next 2 weeks, but maybe you and I don't know, what would be a good next step? Do you want want me to meet with somebody at DMR? Maybe you can come with me?
Yeah.
Or somebody else from the somebody from the committee?
yeah, anybody who wants.
I'll get involved if it
I'll
helps
go.
expedite this
Yeah,
and
we
move
need
things
them.
along.
You need to go.
Yeah,
I'll go.
So whoever
Maybe-
has the most input here needs to go. And the unreasonable thing, we might not get into
Well, I wasn't
definition.
gonna go, I wasn't
But
thinking
maybe
of
if you
doing
could
that.
ask, like, is there
tackling that
like,
part.
can they write something, can they give us some direction on what unreasonable, like, just a common, like,
Yeah.
not even definition, just something that says, this is
Well,
what we think about.
I think these are two different
I think they're
things.
different.
Oh, I do, I know.
I think, let's get this memorialized, however.
Yeah.
And then the unreasonable
That's-
issue
Matt
is
can pop the
important, but I think it,
Yeah.
let's get some,
Matt can pop the question.
Yeah, I don't mind. I'm not afraid. I'll ask any questions.
I just,
Or can
I
get
think you have to complete something.
Yep,
I
we're
agree,
doing this right, we're
100%.
taking bites that we can
Yeah.
Well, at
manage.
least, or come back with some possible language.
Yeah,
I can,
At the
pers-
next
I can
meeting.
pursue this
Yeah.
specific, and then, Matt, I don't mean to say don't, but I just think unreasonable is the next thing.
That's a bigger,
Carrying capacity is the next thing, unreasonable is the next thing. But let's get this solid.
At least get them before us, and then, you know, that might solve a lot of the issues anyway, but we gotta deal with all of it eventually.
So would people be, on this issue, the municipality be more involved by having input, being aware of every lease some way, opt in, and then you participate? I'd be happy to talk with you, or if you're away, with DMR about how can we make sure we're gonna get this. Convince me.
yeah. Yeah. Could be.
And then the other steps. I just think we don't,
Are you talking specifically experimental? Because
Yeah.
standard, we are, okay,
Yeah.
standard, we're already
Yeah.
notified,
Right.
LPAs were.
I mean, it's not gonna change anything on the LPAs or the
Right.
other
Right.
ones, but it's experimental.
And maybe it does need, I mean, if it's in the experimental lease and legislation, maybe there's a way to put it in there that's the opt-in thing and less formal than, other than the applicant shall attend to this pre-app meeting with DMR staff and harbor masters and every
well,
municipality.
part of what I was struggling with was if it's already required in standard,
Yeah.
what's the big deal?
Yeah,
Right. do it.
Let's require it there.
right.
But if we can get it in regulation.
There are, I mean, there
easier-
is an argument for the wasted resources for towns that don't wanna
Yeah.
deal with it, or, you know, whatever. Make it opt-in, that's
Well, you have an
simple, that
LPA that's
way.
400 square feet, you have to do it, and then an experimental that's bigger,
Yeah,
you don't, like, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, but let's set that
So I think we should
aside.
just make it
Just,
yeah.
any reasonable.
I mean, towns, I mean, they currently have that option with standard. If they don't want to participate, they just don't participate.
Yeah.
Right. It just is what it is.
And maybe there's.
That's a good point.
yeah. What?
That
Yeah.
if the town doesn't
Right.
participate, they don't participate,
Right.
nobody comes and gets them.
So there's already
arrest them.
kind of an opt-in thing
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, so if you don't, like, if you don't submit the harbor master questionnaire, they don't come begging for it.
Right.
If you don't provide any kind of input from the town, they don't come seeking it. It's just,
Yeah.
they notify you, here's your opportunity, and if you don't respond, that's on the town.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so now it doesn't sound so complicated.
right.
Just approve it, stamp it.
All right, we are coming up on 2 minutes before our end time, just to keep us on track. I feel like this might be our last thing. Any other, we've kind of already talked about new business, next, other tasks that we need to work on. Any other stuff we need to hit before we adjourn for this one?
Like, we're gonna go out and get more information on the maps, right? We're gonna do
Yeah.
that.
You're gonna
Shake the
forward
trees.
us what you have?
Yep, I will forward that to Paul, and he can send it to the whole
Yep.
group, and chase people down, and let me know when you guys have stuff, and I'll add it.
And if people are okay, I'll pursue this little piece with Allison.
Yep.
Get back to you. We do meet before closure.
Yeah.
If we could probably get some stuff done over email, too.
Oh, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And nothing has to be finalized. Nothing is ever final when you put it into the revisers. Anyway.
And if we're not putting in a bill, it's not so
Well, now it's
important,
up-
but if we
kind of-
are.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking we are.
Okay. I'm so glad you came.
Right.
All right, are we good?
This is great, thank you for
Thank
letting
you.
me
Thank
know.
you for coming.